This has been Hanford Awareness Week in Portland. There have been a lot of activities and programs going on around town the past few days, and we're glad to have our speaker today to help bring us up to date on some of the issues involved there. We're delighted to have so many visitors and guests with us today, too, to hear this program. I remind them that by joining the City Club, you can hear a lot of good and interesting speakers, and you can get a membership application on the way out as you leave today. William Lawless is currently Assistant Professor of Mathematics at Payne College in Augusta, Georgia. He was trained as a nuclear engineer and worked for 6 years with the Department of Energy at the Savannah River Plant in Georgia as project engineer. First in the Nuclear Fuel Cycles Program, then managing the contractor radioactive waste research and contractor operations of the low-level waste burial grounds, high-level waste tank farms, and waste management construction projects at the Savannah plant. He left the DOE as a senior project engineer in 1983 after filing 5 complaints with the DOE Inspector General. 3 complaints were directly supported, a 4th was indirectly supported, and the 5th is reviewed in a November 1985 article entitled Problems with Military Nuclear Waste, published in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. He has spoken many times before many different kinds of groups, particularly in recent days. We catch Mr. Lawless as he makes a swing around the country, as a matter of fact. He's in the middle of a multi-speaking engagement trip before he takes off for a few weeks of vacation in London. He's spoken recently before several congressional committees on this topic, and we are delighted to have him with us here today. Mr. Lawless.
Thank you, Charlie. It's a pleasure for me to be here today and to visit Portland. It's a place that I've always wanted to visit. It's always been on my at the top of my list. I've read many books about the area and magazine articles from Ecotopia all the way up to Hanford Awareness Week. Portland has represented to me the home of environmental consciousness. And so it's quite a pleasure for me to be here today. And I want to thank Marilyn Couch and Robert Frisbee and others that have helped make this trip for me possible. And before I get started, I want to recognize the PANDA group. That's the People Against Nuclear Dumping at Hanford. And some of the things that they're planning to take on, I think, represent to me some of the most important things for this area. That is what's going on at Hanford, both as a current nuclear dump and as a repository for all the nation's high-level waste. What about those repositories? Many scientists in this country today feel that we have everything in hand as far as repositories are concerned, that there are no technological questions. We know everything that there is to know, and that actually the reason why there's a lot of concern today are because of politicians and reporters. There's a lot of citizen fear that's being exploited by these individuals, and it's resulted in exaggerated concerns. And many scientists, again, feel like that there are no problems, that we know what we're doing, and we can design a repository so that there will be no problems. I guess I would like to begin by taking exception to that current feeling. And there are a couple of ways that you can do this as a scientist. You can say, okay, let's look at all of the studies that make predictions about the future. The repository has to be safe for 10,000 years. Reactors can fail ever so often. What are the possibilities? Well, for a reactor within the Department of Energy, they estimate that it's 1 out of 10 to the 7, or 10 million as a possibility that a reactor can fail. Even though there may be contrary evidence to that, those are their predictions at current. Well, another way to look at it is, how has the Department of Energy done throughout the country today? And the results there are not too good. We've got a Department of Energy that's promising right now the American people that there are no problems with repositories, that we have no problems with it. We understand the technology and the geology and the hydrology involved. But at the Savannah River Plant, where the Department of Energy has operated for the past 30 years, we have groundwater so grossly contaminated that the department itself now admits that the Savannah River Plant will have to be kept off limits for at least 1 and possibly 2 or 3 centuries. Strontium-90 is so concentrated at some points that the strontium-90 concentration is 42,000 times EPA drinking water standard, and also exceeds the department's own guidelines. That number was so large to me as an engineer that I couldn't believe it. It was footnoted in the back of one of their documents, and so I called them up to check on it, and they assured me, no, the number is correct. And I said, well, this exceeds your own guidelines, your own criteria. Have you cited the contractor, DuPont, in this instance for violating that criteria? And they said, no, they didn't have to, because these were only guidelines that the contractor cited. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I think that's at the root of it. Also at the Savannah River Plant, the drinking water has been contaminated. It was contaminated as early as 1981. It wasn't made public until 1983, and I was one of those that drank that contaminated water for a couple of years. It was not the Department of Energy that shut down the drinking water wells, nor the Environmental Protection Agency, but the state of South Carolina. And that's another thing that you'll hear, too. The federal agencies are not doing their jobs, and it falls to the states involved to do the jobs for them, and you really can't count on the states either. It's the people here in this room that are out in the audience somewhere listening to what's going on. Those are the people that are going to get the states to take action, and then ultimately the federal government. Back to the Savannah River Plant. There are also 7 kilometers of swampland that are grossly contaminated with cesium-137, with hot spots that run up to 10 times background. Strontium-90 in the Savannah River Plant area exceeds the Environmental Protection Agency milk standard, or average rather, by 7 times. Now that's an interesting number because in the Hanford area, around Hanford, the releases today for strontium-90 are about comparable to what the EPA average is. But at Hanford, Hanford just started reprocessing in 1983. And so the first full year of reprocessing was 1984, and as a result, you may see some changes in strontium-90 concentration of milk in the Hanford area, although I hope not. And finally, at the Savannah River Plant, in 1982, there were a significant number of turtles that were found contaminated with strontium-90 up to 1,000 times background. And these turtles were found up to 4 kilometers away from the source of contamination, but they were also found off the Savannah River Plant in a commercial hog farm. And the hog farm owner himself was not informed of this for a couple of years. I guess since I'm not a health physicist myself and don't look at the direct human consequences of a lot of these problems, I wasn't that concerned about the turtles so much for their levels of concentration as I was for the way the Department of Energy handled the problem. The Department of Energy covered up the report and buried it, and in fact refused to write anything about it until 1984, 2 years after the incident happened. So even though the repository theoretically looks like a good idea, and in theory there are no questions that are unanswered, reality is a little bit more different. In fact, there isn't a Department of Energy facility within the country today that can meet commercial regulations for comparable civilian facilities. There isn't a DOE facility in the country today that could have met the original 1973 criteria that the Department of Energy wrote. Now that's an interesting comment because the Department of Energy is self-regulated, and how does a self-regulated agency handle those kind of problems when it finds that it can't meet its own criteria? And the 1973 criteria was kind of guesswork. A lot of it was written in the dark. They really didn't know the problems that they were getting into in 1973, but But I think by and large they did a pretty good job. It was in 1980 that we found out that the Department of Energy could not meet that 1973 criteria at any one of its sites. And the Department of Energy had two options. It could have tackled the problem head on. It could have fessed up and said, okay, we've messed up, we've got these problems, and we need some cleanup money, and we need to change some of our procedures. Unfortunately, there was a second alternative, and that's the one that the Department of Energy took. It could have changed its guidelines, and that's what it did. It rewrote the guidelines, and today, at every DOE site in the country meets those guidelines. But that's not the good news. In fact, I know of no way that any site, even if they did nothing, could exceed or violate the current guidelines that now exist. What are we talking about here? What are some of these guidelines? Certainly there can be some room for scientists to disagree, and maybe they're just too complicated for the average citizen to understand. Let's see what some of them are. First off, the new guidelines allow the continued use of cardboard boxes throughout the Department of Energy as the primary radioactive waste container. The scientists are a little bit divided within the Department of Energy over that one, but it's amazing how quickly scientific thinking fell by the wayside in this one as soon as it was made public around the Savannah River Plant in 1984. At the Savannah River Plant, cardboard boxes have gone by the wayside, so to speak, and they're now using metal containment and cement pours around the waste, and so they're doing a much better job at the Savannah River Plant. I was recently invited on one of my talks to speak before Dick Nelson's committee at the state of Washington in a debate with Jerry White of the Department of Energy at Hanford. And I had mentioned to the committee about the cardboard boxes, and I'd gone on, and it was some 5 or 10 minutes later, and the issues were getting a little bit more technical, and one of the congressmen stopped me and says, he says, I'm a foreman. He says, look, he says, I don't understand anything of what you're talking about here, but I do understand what cardboard boxes are. And certainly, we're not talking about the same things that I know of as a cardboard box. Certainly, you're talking about pressed cardboard or reinforced cardboard or something like that. And I said, no, these are typical cardboard boxes that you can find at your grocery store. And so he turned to Jerry White and he says, well, what do you use at Hanford? And all of us were a little bit taken aback when he admitted that the Department of Energy in Hanford is still using the cardboard box. So that's still going on at Hanford, and if that's the case, that means that the other DOE sites throughout the complex are still using the cardboard box as well. And that's at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, at Idaho, and at Los Alamos, all of the big radioactive waste disposal sites. There's another one, too, that's in this new criteria, and that's the use of seepage basins, or cribs. Those are just huge holes in the ground. When they're filled up, they look like ponds that we used to swim in when we were kids. They go by the fancy scientific name of natural soil columns. In theory, and I like to look at the theory of this because it's quite comparable to what the DOE engineers and scientists are now talking about for the Hanford repository. In theory, here's how seepage basins work. You pour very dilute contamination into the soil. At Hanford, they not only use seepage basins, but they also use cribs. So they pump it into the cribs at Hanford. And then the contamination percolates down through the soil until it hits the groundwater table. At the Savannah River Plant, it's about at the 30-foot level. At Hanford, that can be 300-400 feet down. And then by the time it gets down there, it's very dilute, and any radioactivity is just about disappeared. But fortunately, we have Mother Nature to depend on, and this contamination will then travel very, very slowly with the groundwater until it hits an outcrop. And an outcrop is another lake or stream or some surface body of water quite a ways downstream. And when it hits this outcrop, the contamination will be quite dilute, and you won't have a problem. As a matter of fact, that's not the way they really work in reality. We only have one seepage basin that's been pulled out of existence at the Savannah River Plant, and it is not the most contaminated. We have 68 seepage basins there. This is just a moderate seepage basin with an average amount of contamination as far as they go, and nothing like some of the cribs used at Hanford. But this one seepage basin was the one that contaminated the Tuscaloosa aquifer underneath the Savannah River Plant, and it was discovered because contamination wound up in the plant manager's drinking water. I don't know if that's the reason why they're cleaning up this one basin, but it probably has something to do with it. What concerns me is that the basin was in use only for 27 years, and the cleanup period is going to take 40 years and $65 million. And this is what the citizens around Hanford can be faced with as they begin to look at the cleanup of the seepage basins and the cribs on Hanford. Today, we know that the amount of fluid going into the Hanford cribs and seepage basins approaches 9.5 billion gallons of fluid each year. Other things that are new in the new criteria for the Department of Energy, it has no airborne waste criteria whatsoever. That means if there is any airborne waste that's being emitted, that there are no criteria to govern that the Department of Energy itself has. What that means at the Savannah River Plant in real dollars, in 1982 dollars, is that we saved $200 million in airborne retrofit. Now, we were reprocessing in 1982, but Hanford was not. Hanford didn't start until 1983. So I don't know what that criteria means for Hanford because I'd already left by that time. Two other changes in the new criteria, very important changes, and the reason why I left the Department of Energy had to do with a reduction in the transuranic level or concentration level, and that's just a fancy term also for plutonium waste, mostly plutonium waste, though there are some other radionuclides involved as well. And that relates directly to a Hanford problem. There were in 1982 and 1983, when we were working on this problem, 12 million cubic meters of contaminated soil at Hanford, contaminated mostly by plutonium-239. And with the new criteria, with a stroke of a pen, that was reduced from 12 million cubic meters down to 4 million cubic meters. Now, why was that important to be done? Well, the nation's first repository is a plutonium waste repository being built down in New Mexico today, and that repository has a volume of only 200,000 cubic meters. In other words, the plutonium contamination at Hanford was some 65 times the volume of the nation's first repository. So not only was it an impossible task, but they had no place to put it if they dug it up, and that's what the 1973 criteria required them to do. So it was important to change that criteria to the Department of Energy, and they did, and now the plutonium-contaminated soil can stay where it is. But they did one other thing, too. They moved that, the remaining 4 million cubic meters, apparently they moved that over to the decommissioning and decontamination branch. And I think that's fascinating. These are just two categories, essentially two paper categories. And in your new environmental impact statement that's now being reviewed by the public, on the very, very first page, there is this opening comment that says, in this document, we will not review low-level waste nor decommissioning and decontamination waste. So that means that they aren't even allowing the public to discuss this 12 million cubic meters of plutonium-contaminated soil, because it is all now low-level waste, or it's been moved over to the D&D section. So it's not even open for discussion. And finally, high-level waste. This was probably the most important problem at Hanford. The high-level wastes in 149 tanks could not be removed because the 149 tanks were either leaking and had failed completely with large holes in them, or the tanks had been isolated on purpose from the environment, just blanked off, cut off from the environment. In those 149 tanks, we had high-level waste. With the new criteria to avoid the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, to keep the NRC from coming on from going on to the Hanford facility and licensing this potential repository, the Department of Energy redefined its standards in this most important area, and with the new criteria, the new Department of Energy criteria, the Hanford waste can sit right where it is. It doesn't have to be pulled out, and it does not have to be regulated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And those, I think, are real serious problems. Now, Secretary Harrington said recently, about 7 or 8 months ago, in 1985, that the problems that we're finding at the DOE sites throughout the country are just legacies of the past. That's the way we used to do business. Today we do a much better job of it. But if a much better job of it is coming up with a criteria such as the one that the Department of Energy now uses, then I have to take exception to what Secretary Harrington says. The new criteria allows cardboard boxes, and I think is a symbol that represents the height of ancient technology. That's the best technology that should not be used, not in this year, not in 1945, not ever. And in fact, in the commercial environment, that cardboard box is not allowed. So what is going on? What happened? What can we do about it? Well, I think the shuttle accident that everybody saw on television that was so vivid in everyone's mind kind of symbolizes to me what's going on with the Department of Energy. We have a system heavy in management that reduces the best and the worst engineer to the same level and keeps the free interchange and the exercise of arguments between scientists and engineers to a minimum. And I think that needs to be changed. And I believe the ones that are at fault on that are the American people. I think it's our fault. I think we gave the Department of Energy too much authority. We gave NASA too much authority. And as the shuttle report has recommended that the American people take back some of that authority and some of that responsibility, I think we need to do the same thing with the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy is a self-regulated agency, and that self-regulation should be stopped. I'm running out of time, and I would like to make a couple of comments, direct comments about the repository, and then we'll open it up to questions. The repository that's planned for Hanford is a wet repository. Now, I don't know if you know what that means, but that means that the high-level wastes will be going into an aquifer, and that water can then approach the waste. I was quite concerned about that, and in discussions before the Academy of Science meeting in Vancouver and talking with the Department of Energy, and they said that it's in their theory that there are no problems with that because their calculations show that if there is a failure in one of these high-level waste containers in the Hanford repository, that even though it's surrounded by water, it will still take some 10,000 years to get out. And they said that they doubt that it would fail anyway because we have sufficient backup systems and what have you. Well, they made those kind of predictions with the seepage basins. They also made those predictions with the Lyons facility, Lyons, Kansas, in 1971. And at Lyons, the Atomic Energy Commission then stated that, hey, we have all of the information that we need. We've got all of the knowledge that we need. There are no questions remaining on the Lyons, Kansas facility. This is the place that we're going to put all of the commercial high-level waste and spent nuclear fuel from all the reactors throughout the country. And we've even done a 19-month field test, and there are no questions remaining. We feel assured beyond any questions and beyond any doubt. Of course, it was in 1972 that Lyons was shut down and abandoned because of discoveries of faults and disappearing water. There's a question on the Hanford facility whether or not it can meet the releases, because the release guidelines for the repository, because of the releases that are currently being set out today into the Columbia River. For instance, there are annual monitoring reports that come off of the DOE Hanford facility that show that the DOE has exceeded guidelines, its own guidelines, not someone else's, for releases of ruthenium and iodine. And I think that that should be questioned. We have tritium, alpha, and beta springs going into the Columbia River that all exceed the EPA drinking water standard, and I think that that's a violation of federal law. Finally, the siting process itself has us wound up with 3 sites, and that's Hanford and Yucca Mountain and Deaf Smith, and it's only the Yucca Mountain site that is a dry repository. How do I feel about that? Well, I think there's so many uncertainties involved in the repository process that we've got to be very careful with the design of it, but we're still going to wind up with a lot of uncertainties, even with the best possible design and the best possible site. And I think that putting it into a wet repository is just going to foreclose some of our options. So I think that that the best possible thing that we can do is put it into a dry repository. And if there's a mistake, we can take it out, we can correct it, and we can go someplace else, 50 or 100 or 200 years from now. The selection process has narrowed it down to 3 sites, but we don't yet today know whether or not we've got the best 3 sites. We don't know whether the best site is on the East Coast or the West Coast, and I think that that's something that we need to know as a nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawless. We have time for some questions. If you have a question, please come to the microphone. But the privilege of the first question goes to our board host for the day, member of the Board of Governors, John Frohnmeyer.
Dr. Lawless, I would like you to address the political issue, which is basically that nobody seems to want to have a repository in or anywhere near where he or she lives. How do you deal with that issue?
Not in my backyard is a very important question, and I think that if the lawsuits that are going to be coming up and have already come up from the West Coast don't address that, then it will cause additional problems. We have to, as a nation, look for the best site wherever it is, and today I don't think we have found that. And so I don't think it's a not in my backyard issue at this time, but it is something that we will have to contend with in all fairness, and we will have to make a decision about that. And the Nuclear Waste Policy Act represents that decision, and it says that we need 2 sites, and one is going to be on the East Coast and one is going to be in the West Coast. But beyond that, I think we need to find the best site and go through the best screening process that we can possibly go through. We don't have any reliability analysis on the screening process that has been completed, and we don't know if it was a valid method of screening. And those are 2 very fundamental questions that need to be addressed first. Yes.
I'm State Representative Ron Cease and a member of the City Club.
How you doing?
I'm also a member of the Joint Senate-House Committee on Hazardous Materials. And if I had any question that this whole process was not political, I certainly was educated recently when the Department of Energy indicated it was postponing or indefinitely a consideration of the selection of a second site. But looking at this issue, and specifically in reference to Hanford, and what I know about it suggests to me it's an awful place to put this kind of activity. And I think I and my colleagues and others want to battle it the best we can to prevent it. I'd be interested in your suggestions as we go about that, both politically and legally, what can be done to forestall something that I think would be a tragedy for this area.
Thank you, Mr. Cease. Well, there's no question in my mind that united or unified action will be the best sort of an action. But beyond that, what the state of New Mexico and the state of Tennessee have done, they filed suit against the Department of Energy and won in both cases, and established with Department of Energy money local or regional peer review committees with money funded by the DOE through the local states, the respective states, setting up an independent peer review group, independent from the state as well as the Department of Energy. It's worked very, very well in New Mexico, and at the recent Academy of Science meeting, the National Academy of Science spokesman spoke very highly of that current arrangement. That's what we don't have today. We don't have the engineers and scientists that are paid to work on the problem and to produce an independent result. So the scientists and engineers that are working on it are in a personally high-risk sort of a situation. It doesn't matter how much they care about it. They're going to burn out. The engineers and the ecologists and the scientists with the state of Washington are already, I think, in that position, and I think it's a dangerous position to get into. You've got to have individuals that can work on this problem in a full-time fashion. And it's not just for the Defense Waste EIS or the repository, but it's for all of the technical documents, all of the environmental actions that take place at the Hanford facility. It's the only way that the public can stay informed. I just am convinced that you cannot depend on a self-regulated agency that's very concerned about its visibility to be honest with you and tell you exactly what's going on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lynn Dingler, member. Mr. Lawless, much of the information we have, and I accept the fact you aren't an expert in this area, on the health problems associated with waste or any of our cumulative waste problems are projections of short-term acute problems at these facilities. Someone's been contaminated, someone hasn't. We have very little information on long-term cumulative, or long-term interactive. 2 years ago we had a report from the head of the environmental medicine section at the U of O Med School that much of our cancer in this area was environmentally induced. I haven't seen him recently, so I'm not sure what happened to him. But I do know that there's very little epidemiological information on any of the cumulative effects of either commercial or any types of nuclear hazardous waste. Are you aware of studies? Can you direct us to any information sources on these effects?
That's an excellent question. The part of the problem is that those studies that have been done have been in-house studies or have been contracted out. So the studies are of somewhat questionable value until they have been replicated by outsiders or what have you. For instance, quite a few years ago, DuPont at the Savannah River Plant did turn up a cancer effect from working in certain areas. The study was not published. The study was reconstituted recently with a much larger population, and the cancer effect was washed out. What did happen to that particular study was that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control out of Atlanta, got a hold of it and criticized the department sharply. And it's this kind of a free interchange or exchange of criticism that is the best or the hallmark of science, and it's what is really needed right now. I think that the CDC is involved in the Hanford area. Jim Ruttenberg, I believe, from the Centers for Disease Control is beginning to look at some of this now, but that's one man, and it's on one job. And I think that this local peer review committee could interface with both the National Academy of Sciences and with the CDC to form a real good relationship, as has taken place down in New Mexico, to have a long-term study of these things. And finally, to answer you directly, that there seems to be a real difficult question to answer because of a lot of the data has not been put into the right hands, and I think with a peer review committee we might be able to take care of that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I am Marsh Cronin, member of the City Club.
How you doing?
I wonder if you could address a question that bothers me: why the obsession with a 10,000-year repository, when as an alternative one might consider much more rationally simply storing the materials in a dry cement warehouse? It seems to me that the obsession about the 10,000 years implies an extreme arrogance on the part of the people who have made that decision. It says human beings will not learn anything about how to handle these materials for the next 300 or 400 years. The cement warehouse is going to hold up very well for that length of time.
I think that's a good point. The part of the problem with that is that we have to be prepared for the collapse of our civilization, or what is known as the ending of institutional control. And so we even have the MRS in Tennessee as a temporary idea or as an alternative, which would fit into the same category that you're speaking about. And finally, at the Savannah River Plant, where a vitrification facility, that is to say a glass-making facility, that the high-level waste will be put into is under construction right now and will be operational in a couple of years. And that vitrification facility will have high-level waste canisters at the Savannah River Plant stored until the repository is opened up. Personally, I think that we need to go for deep geologic storage, because we have to be prepared for the alternative that we won't have the will, nor the ability, nor the financial capability to resolve these problems at some later date. Now that sounds like a strange statement to make, but at the Savannah River Plant today, without cleaning up any of the groundwater, just removing the physical structures, the highly contaminated physical structures on a facility, that will cost $20 billion. And you've got similar price tags at each one of the DOE facilities around the country, some of them much larger, such as at Hanford. And you're going to get to a point where you're just not going to be able to do it all. And so I think it would be much better to go ahead and build a repository, but not put it into a wet environment, such as at Hanford. Put it into a dry repository, and if worse comes to worse, then at least it's underground, and at least the future civilization here in this country will have some chance to deal with it.
Could I respond to that one, too?
Sure.
It bothers me enormously. It seems to me that notion of a lapse in history must have come from people who have never been to Europe. They've never been to a cathedral that's still standing there after 400 and 500 years, or a castle. They've never been to Greece. Where's the gap? Where's the evidence that the human race is just going to suddenly lose its memory? I mean, I don't really understand that argument at all.
That's a fine comment. It's not that they will lose their memory, but it's that they will have high-level waste, the most dangerous form of radioactivity known to mankind, sitting in those canisters and sitting in that cement coliseum. And they have to have the technology that goes with that to deal with that. So your comment is a very good comment, but I think at the same time, as conscientious engineers and scientists, must deal with the possibility that we won't be able to take care of that waste as scientists and engineers.
We're nearing the end of our time. If the next two questioners could make it short.
Ed Finkley, City Club member.
Go ahead.
The federal government's repository study seems to be geared around a time frame toward the mid-90s. Could you explain to the group today what is the urgency of this mid-90s in the search for a nuclear repository, and if it takes more time than that to find what you think is an acceptable site and what politically we decide is necessary in a time to debate it, what are the implications to the commercial nuclear program if the site is not found within the time frame the federal government's pushing toward?
That's a good question. The problem with the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, as far as the Department of Energy is concerned, is this. By 1998, they own the spent fuel around the country, one way or the other, whether they've got a repository open or not. So that's what's driving the Department of Energy to get this repository built on time. But we should not confuse national priorities and bureaucratic decisions with the best decision, the best scientific decision on where the best site is. And so I think your comment is very good for that reason as well. Yes.
My name is Joseph Miller. I'm a City Club member. My concern has to do with public information. Through your talk, you've told us that a lot of information has been withheld from the public by the government. Here in Portland, we have a problem with public information. For instance, to my knowledge, very little has been said in the public about the danger that Hanford will impose to our drinking water, that is, to the drinking water of people who live in the Portland metro area. They're getting a lot of this water now from deep wells only a couple of miles from the Columbia River downstream from Hanford. I would like to know, when the public has not been told these things by our local people how the individual citizens are going to inform themselves.
Well, that's a good question. Of course, you touched on quite a few things. One of the standard procedures or techniques for the Department of Energy when it has found a report within its midst that has been written that causes them a great deal of concern if that report ever got out, is to recall the report and reclassify it as a draft, which keeps it exempt of Freedom of Information requests. So I think your question, which is something we can talk about for some time, has many important implications. Hopefully, the Columbia River water, by the time it gets down to Portland, is safe. I don't know that. I've not looked at any of the statistics on the water as it passes this area. I do know that at the point of discharge into the Columbia at the Hanford facility, the DOE is exceeding the federal guidelines on drinking water standards, and that should be stopped. But it does come down a little bit to not in our backyard. I mean, the Hanford is close to your backyard, but almost far enough away that you don't have to feel quite as concerned about it. And I hope that doesn't happen here. One of the things I most admire about the city of Portland is how conscientious the people have been in environmental questions and matters. And we all have people and friends who work around the Hanford facility or may work around there, and our kids may wind up there one day, and our great-grandchildren may wind up there one day. And so it's, I think, important to all of us that we see that environment is cleaned up. It's unforgivable to me as an engineer to see that 500 or 600 square miles of property has to be written off for humankind, for perpetuity, whatever that means. It's unforgivable to me when we have the means and the technology to do a better job of it. We don't have to use cardboard boxes, and we don't have to use seepage basins, and we don't have to go around changing our criteria and guidelines when we don't meet them. I think that's the power that we've given it too much of to the Department of Energy, and that's why it's our responsibility to pull that power back from the Department of Energy and to assume that responsibility ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawless. Thank you very much. It was an extremely provocative and, as I said before, timely presentation, and we appreciate your being here. Next Friday, Douglas Fraser, former president of the UAW. Remember to get your membership dues in promptly, if you will. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Very interesting.